She thought she had the house, the cash, and the last word. 5 minutes into the will reading, she was already choosing a new backsplash for my mother's kitchen. 10 minutes later, she was staring at a document that erased her winnings like chalk in the rain. If you clicked because the thumbnail promised exactly this: a forged narrative, a contested will, $510,000 on the line, and a reversal inside a law office, you're in the right place. I run a channel called After Her Lies, and today I'm telling you how a funeral week power grab turned into a public correction under oath. My name is Megan Carter. I'm 35. I film in a spare bedroom of a modest duplex on West 98th in Cleveland, Ohio, with a borrowed lens and a microphone that crackles if I breathe too close. The her in After Her Lies is my aunt, my mother's younger sister by 3 years. A dental hygienist who can make any sentence sound like a favor. I will leave her first name out because my channel is about behavior and documents, not spectacle. What matters is that in January of this year, January 2nd, 2024, my mother died after a long run with congestive heart failure. She left a small Cape Cod, a Vanguard account, and a checking balance that usually floated between 5 and 7,000. The Vanguard account, after the market year she had, and the sale of a small annuity in 2023, sat at $510,000 on the date of death statement. The Cape Cod, last appraised in 2022, was worth around $290,000. A will existed, dated April the 12th, 2022, with a self-proving affidavit. There was also a durable power of attorney I had used during her hospital stays. A transfer on death designation affidavit we recorded on December 8th, 2023. And a binder full of statements, beneficiary forms, and the deeds my mother insisted on keeping within arm's reach of the phone. The will reading happened at a bank trust conference room on Carnegie Avenue because my aunt said it should. She said the family should hear it together and that she would serve as personal representative. She said the trust officer from the bank had graciously offered space and that a notary would be present to keep us honest. Her tone landed on me like a wet coat. She had been named in the will as alternate executor after my mother's friend, a retired teacher named Nora, who had gone south to Florida in 2023, and quietly told us she didn't want the job anymore. The stakes were obvious. A house with a deed, an account with $500,000, and the question of what my mother had intended, which is another way of saying who would be believed when it mattered. The humiliation started with the locks. 48 hours after the funeral, I stopped at the house to pick up my mother's sewing machine and a couple of folders from the hall closet. The deadbolt had been changed. A note in my aunt's handwriting said, "Call me for access." It was 8 degrees outside. I called. She didn't pick up. When she finally did, she said it was for safety, and that as acting executor, she needed to secure property. She knew that the will, dated April the 12th, 2022, named me as residuary beneficiary, 50%, and her as 50%. She also knew that beneficiary designations on non-probate assets don't care what a will says, and that my mother had been making quiet, stubborn changes all through 2023. I knew because I helped locate forms, call transfer agents, and schedule the notary for the transfer on death affidavit for the house. My aunt knew because she read my mother's email when my mother left her Gmail open during Thanksgiving. But she pretended not to. The pressure escalated in small ways that add up. She told relatives at the repast that I'd already taken the good jewelry. The good jewelry was a silver charm bracelet and a thin gold band from 1974 that my mother kept in a teacup on her dresser. She posted a note to the family Facebook group about respecting the deceased by following her wishes through the will. She scheduled the reading for January 10th, 2024 at 2 in the afternoon, which meant most people could come on a lunch hour, which meant I would be humiliated in daytime lighting if humiliation was on the menu. I spent the days before it doing what I do on my channel before I record, gathering facts I can point to. I pulled the county recorder's page for the transfer on death designation affidavit we filed on December 8th. I printed the recorded image with the stamp and the instrument number. I printed the Vanguard beneficiary designation my mother signed on November 15th, 2023, witnessed by her neighbor, naming me as transfer on death beneficiary on the taxable account. I printed the POD forms for the checking account, which only had $6,313, because loose ends matter. I highlighted the clause in the will that said, "Any property subject to a valid non-probate transfer shall pass outside this will." I put everything in one red folder. I texted Nora to ask if she would be willing to send a short email confirming her renunciation as first-named executor under RC 2107. 60. She did. It said 5 sentences and attached a PDF of the renunciation she had already signed and mailed to the probate court. I also sent an email to the notary whose stamp was on the transfer on death affidavit, asking if she kept a journal entry for that date and if she could confirm who appeared. She replied yes, and that her journal reflects that my mother personally appeared with me, that she checked ID, and that the document was signed in her presence. She could not attend the reading, but she could be reached for verification. I printed that too. Then the kicker. A week before the reading, a certified letter showed up. It was a filing for appointment of a special administrator, naming my aunt, stamped received January 5th, 2024, by the Cuyahoga County Probate Court. She had filed ex parte to be appointed to collect assets, citing need to secure real property and financial holdings. She attached a copy of the 2022 will. There was no mention of the December 8th, 2023 transfer on death designation affidavit. There was no mention of the Vanguard beneficiary change on November 15th. There was a schedule listing the Cape Cod and a brokerage account estimated value $500,000. I took the filing downtown, and clerk staff explained that a special administrator can secure and preserve assets but cannot distribute them, and that once a full probate is opened and an executor appointed, those powers end. I asked if the court had the renunciation from Nora. They did not yet. Mail, they said, is slower than everyone wishes. 2 in the afternoon on January 10th, a trust officer with a navy tie unlocked a glass-walled conference room and directed us to chairs. There were 7 of us. My aunt, in a cream sweater dress she wore to every ceremony. Her husband, who looked at the carpet as if it would help. My cousin, her daughter, with an iPhone on the table for notes. My mother's 2 church friends, both kind, both exhausted. Me, with my red folder. At the far end sat a bank notary and a junior attorney who introduced himself as here to facilitate, not to advise either side. My aunt opened with a preamble about what our sister intended and how important it is to keep family out of court. Then she slid a copy of the April 12, 2022 will onto the table like a winning hand and said she would honor the 50-50 split after she liquidated the house. She looked at me when she said liquidated, as if the verb could bruise. I let her talk. I let the will be read out loud. Specific bequests, the sewing machine to me, a modest gift of $5,000 to the church, the ring to her daughter, residue. To my issue and my sister in equal shares, per stirpes. Then the clause I had highlighted about non-probate transfers passing outside the will. There it was, clear. The attorney paused on it and moved on. My aunt rolled over it like a speed bump and kept going as if nothing in our family had bypassed probate in the last decade. She held the room with confidence, borrowed from the word executor. She announced a timeline. If Megan will vacate the house by February 1st, I can list in March and we can close in April. The market starts moving again in spring. The notary, whose job was to witness signatures if any were needed, looked down at her stamp as if it could save her. That's when I asked for the floor. My voice did not quiver because I had papers. I said my mother's will said what it said. I said non-probate transfers pass outside it. I said a transfer on death designation is a non-probate transfer. I slid the recorded affidavit across the table. It had the county recorder's stamp. Instrument number 2023, Qual 3457, December 8th, 2023. It named me, Megan Carter, as a transfer on death beneficiary of the Cape Cod on West 98th. I slid the Vanguard beneficiary designation change confirmation, dated November 15th, 2023, showing the account ending in 4412, payable on death to me. I slid the checking pod form, signed July 1st, 2023. I slid the email from Nora, renouncing being executor and consenting to my appointment. I slid the email from the notary, who notarized the TOD affidavit confirming my mother appeared and signed. My aunt went white and then hot. She said Mum would never have done that without telling me. I said she did, and she told me to get it recorded. She said this is forged. I said it was notarized and recorded, and the notary kept a journal. The junior attorney cleared his throat and said that a recorded transfer on death designation, if valid under state law, vests title on death in the name beneficiary, subject to claims. He said the will could not override a valid TOD for real property. The trust officer nodded, like he had heard this conversation in other rooms for a living. My cousin pressed her lips tight and lifted her phone, which I noticed was already recording. The air got heavier. My aunt pivoted to posture. She said, as special administrator, she had a duty to secure the house, and that changing locks was standard. She said the court would see it her way because all this is suspicious and last minute. I said the notary journal would show December 8th, 2023. I said the Vanguard system logs would show November 15th, 2023, and that it had been in effect for nearly 2 months before my mother died. I said we would do whatever the law requires. I said distribution is straightforward. The house passes to me outside probate. The Vanguard passes to me outside probate. The checking account passes to me outside probate. The small savings account with $700 passes to the estate because the POD wasn't updated, and the estate pays the church and the funeral bill and any last medicals. And then anything remaining splits 50-50 under the will if there is a residue. Then I paused, because the next sheet in my red folder was my leverage, and I wanted the room to breathe before it saw it. I had learned something in 2023 sitting beside my mother's hospital bed. She did not like to be rushed into forms. She would not initial anything until she heard it read twice. She was stubborn and precise and always asked for a copy. In November, when we changed the Vanguard beneficiary, the associate offered to mail a new confirmation. My mother said, "No, we will print it now, and you will sign the mailing envelope as received for Megan's records." The associate looked confused and then did it. My mother did this because she had been burned in the 90s when a bank clerk misplaced a CD signature card. She told me once, "Documents are proof that your memory existed." My leverage wasn't only the transfer on death affidavit. It was a voicemail my mother's cardiologist left for me on December 7th, confirming he had cleared her to sign documents, noting her medication adjustments, and stating in his careful doctor monotone that she was alert and oriented ×3. It was the email from the county recorder's office acknowledging receipt and recording of the TOD affidavit with the timestamp 3:14 p.m. It was a short text from my mother that night that said, "Done. Sleep now." It was small and human, but in probate human timing matters. And then there was the last page of the 2022 will that my aunt had not read out loud. A no contest clause in terra rem, stating that any beneficiary who contests the will or any non-probate transfer without probable cause would be treated as having predeceased my mother with respect to their share of the residue. I looked at my aunt and said, "There is one more clause." The junior attorney asked if he could see my copy. He read the paragraph I pointed to. He blinked and read it again. My aunt's husband leaned forward. The church friends whispered. The clause wasn't a hammer. In Ohio, no contest clauses are enforceable, but tempered by probable cause standards. Still, there it was. Plain. Contest without probable cause, and you lose your share of what's inside the will. The house and the Vanguard, if validly transferred, were outside. The only part she could cut herself out of by fighting was the residue. She said, "I'm not contesting, I'm being careful." I said, "Being careful is not filing ex parte as if the TOD doesn't exist." I slid her filing across the table. Stamped January 5th, 2024. She looked at the stamp like it had betrayed her. She said, "We'll see what the judge says." I said, "We will. And we will bring the notary journal, the recording, the doctor's voicemail, and the Vanguard logs." She said, "Logs can be faked." I said, "Your daughter is recording right now. You trust recordings." And then I saw the clause nobody expected. The clause wasn't in the will. It was in a contract I had not thought about until the junior attorney, Flipping through a binder my aunt brought, stopped on a document labeled Caregiver Agreement dated May 1st, 2023. It was between my mother and my aunt. It promised my aunt $25 an hour for caregiving services, signed by both, with my aunt's hours recorded in a notebook I had never seen. The totals in the margin added up to $28,000. There were checks attached, photocopied, written to my aunt in $500 increments. The clause that stopped me cold said, compensation shall be due from the estate if not paid in full during decedent's life. My aunt had built a claim. I will not pretend I did not feel heat rise in my face. I had done more than a year of care with my mother, 18 months. Off and on, more on than off. I had given up weekends and turned down freelance gigs and watched, from the chair by her bed, as spring budded and fell outside the narrow window. I had never thought to invoice my mother. The agreement was real in the sense that signatures make things real. It was also sloppy. The hours were blocks of 4s and 5s with no dates. The attached checks had memo lines that said groceries and gas, not caregiving. The rate was above what we had paid the home health aide in 2022. The clause created leverage for my aunt to file a creditor claim against the estate before any residue was calculated. She smiled when she saw me reading it. She said, "I didn't want to have to use this," which meant she came to use this. That night, instead of cutting a video, I opened a spreadsheet. I logged every day I had sat with my mother in 2023. I pulled texts that said, "Can you come by? I feel dizzy." I pulled receipts for prescriptions I paid for. I pulled photos of dates on whiteboards in the hospital rooms. Time hemorrhages from memory. Phones make new veins. I wasn't trying to invoice. I was trying to reconstruct truth in the unit the court understands. The first obstacle was procedural. On January 17th, my aunt filed an application to probate the will and to be appointed executor, attaching Nora's renunciation, which had finally landed. She listed me as interested party. She did not list the transfer on death designation affidavit. I filed an objection to her appointment on January 22nd, asking the court to appoint me instead, attaching the TOD affidavit and the beneficiary forms to show our interests diverged and her potential conflict in administering an estate that now mostly consisted of paying the church and settling small bills. I proposed the bank's trust department as a neutral alternative if the court preferred. The clerk set a hearing for February 5th, 2024. The second obstacle was interpersonal, and it was brutal in a way documents can't absorb. My cousin sent a group text to the extended family on January 19th saying, "Megan is stealing Grandma's house." The comments piled up. The friend of a friend posted a screenshot. I did not answer in the thread. I called my cousin and said, "Please take that down." She said, "If you're right, the court will say so." Which is another way of saying the internet will not apologize. On January 20th, I walked back into the bank trust conference room with the junior attorney and the notary. This time, there were only 4 of us. My aunt and her husband on one side, me on the other. The junior attorney proposed a simple status. The court would decide the executor appointment in February. The estate would not take steps to list the house because of the recorded TOD, and no one would move or sell personal property without agreement. My aunt refused to sign. She said she was not conceding. She said possession is 9/10. She looked at the notary and asked if she would notarize a temporary right to access that kept me out. The notary said she would only notarize signatures, not facts. Tiny hills are where people choose to die. I recorded a video on January 22nd for my channel. I did not post it. I said into the camera that death exposes structures the living pretend not to see. I said each form is a gear. I said when gears mesh, power moves. When they grind, you get heat. I said we were going to court. My voice sounded flat. I closed the laptop and drove to my mother's house. I sat in the driveway. Snow fell like static. I watched my aunt's car leave. I waited 10 minutes. I walked around the back to the basement door. It stuck, like always, and then opened with a grunt. The heat was on. The house smelled like dust and fabric softener. I took 2 photo albums and the teacup with the ring. I left everything else. I locked the door behind me. Then I did the thing that changed the arc of this story. I called the county recorder's public terminal helpline and asked how to retrieve certified copies of the transfer on death designation affidavit with race seal for court. A woman named Teresa told me to come Tuesday morning, bring ID, and $5 per copy. I asked if a certified copy can be used to update the tax duplicate. She said yes, after the estate clears liens. I asked how long that takes. She said it depends on claims. She said a caregiver claim would need documentation. Teresa said something else that sent me home to my red folder. She asked, "Do you also have the survivorship affidavit?" I said I did not, because there was no joint owner. She said sometimes people record a memorandum of trust or a revocation around the same time. Check your instrument numbers. I did. The instrument number on the TOD affidavit was 2023 1-34567. The next instrument in the public index, 2023 to 112-34568, recorded 2 minutes later, was a revocation of durable power of attorney signed by my mother, revoking a power she had given my aunt in 2021. It was something I didn't know my mother had done. It explained the locks more than the grief did. It was dated the same December day. It was notarized by the same notary. I printed it and tucked it next to the TOD affidavit. It didn't change property. It changed posture. It said, in the public archive, that my mother had gathered authority back to herself at the end. It also made any act my aunt took under that power after December 8th subject to challenge. At the February 5 hearing, the judge, a woman who looked like she had been a magistrate for years and had seen every type of sibling dispute, began by confirming the will. She asked if anyone contested the April 12, 2022 document. No one did. She asked about the renunciation by Nora and whether alternate executor appointment was contested. I stood at the lectern and said yes. I said the probate assets were minimal because of non-probate transfers, and that my aunt and I had conflicting interests, and that she had filed ex parte without disclosing the TOD and beneficiary forms. I handed the clerk the certified copy of the TOD affidavit with the raised seal. I handed the sworn affidavit from the Vanguard custodian confirming the beneficiary designation effective November 15th. I handed the medical provider's letter on letterhead that my mother was oriented and capable on December 7th and December 8th. I handed the revocation of power of attorney. I kept my voice level. I said I would serve if appointed, but I also suggested the bank as neutral. My aunt's attorney, she had hired one by then, argued that the TOD was last minute and that the court should closely scrutinize it. He said words like undue influence without saying undue influence. He asked that the court appoint my aunt because she had already secured the property. The judge looked at him and asked, "Secured against what?" He said against damage, removal of personal property, squatters. The judge asked if there had been any police reports or break-ins. He said no. She asked if locks had been changed. He said yes. She asked on what authority. He said a special administrator. She asked if that appointment had been ex parte. He said yes because of urgency. She asked where the urgency was now that the house had a TOD. He didn't have a clean answer. The judge appointed the bank a special administrator for 60 days, pending resolution of any creditor claims, and scheduled a status for April 1st. She did not appoint either of us executor. She told the bank to inventory and to allow access by both sides to personal property under supervision. She told my aunt to return keys to the bank. She told me not to enter the house without the bank. It wasn't a victory dance. It was order. Adult life, at least mine, has taught me that order is the quiet sibling of justice. It doesn't hug. It doesn't console. But it keeps the lights on while you sort the rest. With the bank in place and keys out of my aunt's purse, the next move was claims. On February the 12th, my aunt filed a creditor claim for $28,000 for caregiving. She attached the May 1st, 2023 agreement and a spreadsheet of hours prepared by her daughter. It listed 112 days at 4 hours each and 40 days at 3 hours, totals rounded to the nearest 100. There were no specific dates. The bank asked for documentation. My aunt provided the photocopied checks and some texts saying, "Stopping by, bringing soup, and at the doctor with Mum." The bank asked for a doctor appointment log. My aunt provided screenshots of calendar entries on her phone, labeled MomDoc. The bank asked me if I intended to dispute. I said I intended to ask for clarity. I sent my spreadsheet with dates I had been present, receipts for prescriptions, Uber rides to fair value the trips I covered, and messages where my mother texted both of us at once, saying, "Megan here, thanks for the soup." I said I was not making a claim. I said I wanted the bank to look at the hours. The bank did what banks do. It requested my mother's May through December 2023 phone records with call logs, since most medical offices in our city still call when they schedule. It obtained appointment records from her providers with sign-in sheets, noting the name of the person who accompanied her when recorded. It cross-checked with my mother's Uber account and insurance transportation claims. It built a picture from data points that don't care about feelings. On March 11th, it issued a preliminary determination, recommending allowance of $8,000 of my aunt's claim for documented hours at an adjusted rate of $18, based on local home health aid rates, and denying $20,000 for lack of documentation. My aunt's attorney objected and asked for a hearing. The judge set one for March 25th. Meanwhile, I made a discovery I didn't expect to matter, but did. Sorting my mother's mail at the bank's direction, I found a letter dated August 14, 2021, appointing my aunt as her healthcare power of attorney back then, before she drifted to me for day-to-day help. I also found a second letter dated December 8, 2023, to the same hospital system, revoking any prior healthcare powers and naming me. The revocation matched the public revocation of the financial power recorded that same day. The dates lined up like guardrails. I took copies to the bank. I took copies to court. At the March 25 hearing on the creditor claim, the judge took testimony. It was public. Bank counsel explained the method. My aunt's attorney called her to testify. She spoke about hours and about duties. She cried. I did not look away. I know care is not a ledger. I also know courts are not temples of vibe. Under cross, the bank's lawyer pointed to December 8th and asked if my aunt knew my mother had revoked her powers that day. She said she found out later. He asked if she had used the old power after that date to call a bank or make a decision. She said she might have called the gas company. He asked about the caregiver agreement. She said my mother insisted on paying her fair value. He asked why the memo lines on checks said groceries. She said my mother didn't like writing care on checks. He asked for dates of the 3-hour blocks on her spreadsheet. She said she didn't have them. The judge ended the hearing by adopting the bank's recommendation. She allowed $8,000, denied the rest without prejudice to a more specific submission within 30 days. My aunt's attorney said he would submit more. He did not. 30 days later, the denial became final for the rest. The residue under the will increased by $20,000 that would have been paid to her. With claims settled, the bank filed its inventory on April 1st. Probate assets were minimal. An old car valued at $3,000. A savings account with $724. Household goods valued at $2,000. Debts included the funeral, which had been prepaid with a small life insurance, and the church bequest of $5,000. The bank prepared the application to release the house to me upon filing an affidavit of survivorship for the TOD, which in our state is a one-page form referencing the recorded instrument and the death certificate. The judge signed the release on April 10th. The county auditor updated the tax duplicate to show my name under owner as of with the TOD reference. The bank transferred the car title to me because I needed wheels. The Vanguard, outside probate, had already processed on February 1st with the date of death valuation applied and the cost basis captured. I opened a fresh account to receive it and requested a stepped-up basis confirmation because that matters for future capital gains. That's a sentence you don't expect to say on camera, but real life is W-9s and basis letters. My aunt still had one move, and she played it at the final accounting hearing in May. She asked the judge to award her executor fees as if she had served those early weeks. She argued that she had secured property and organized papers and prevented dissipation. The judge asked the bank if it had needed to redo anything my aunt did. The bank said yes. It had to catalogue, change locks properly, and reverse a winter service cancellation my aunt had submitted under the revoked power. The judge denied fees to my aunt, awarded modest fees to the bank for necessary administration, and approved the final account. She then looked at my aunt and said, "I strongly recommend against social media posts during probate." It wasn't sanction. It was adult supervision. Here is what happened because of those documents and the formal settings that gave them weight. The house passed to me on April 10th, subject to the small mortgage that had been paid off in 2018. So subject to nothing but taxes. I kept the Cape Cod. I did not sell it. I applied for the homestead exemption my mother had taken and qualified in my own right because my income last year was low. I installed a new deadbolt. I changed the curtains. I did not replace the backsplash. The Vanguard account of $510,000 transferred to me. I met with a fee-only planner on June 2nd, 2024. We decided that half would go into a low-cost index allocation and that I would keep 12 months of expenses in cash equivalents, pay off my student loan balance of $18,923 and build a fund for property taxes and roof replacement in 2026. I set up an automatic monthly transfer to my checking of $2,000 for stability while my channel's income grows. I hired a part-time CPA to help with the 2024 tax return and the step-up calculations, and I sent a copy of the basis letter to my files with the word backup in the file name because once burned, always careful. For my aunt, there were consequences, not catastrophic, but real. She received half of the residue under the will, which ended up being about $940 after the church bequest, the modest creditor allowance to herself, and the bank's fees. She did not get executor fees. She paid her attorney. I don't know how much. At the June family picnic, she did not speak to me. In July, she texted me a photo of my mother's ring on her daughter's hand. It was the one specific bequest to her daughter, and it looked pretty in the afternoon light. I wrote back, "Looks good." That was the last text in our thread for a while. There were non-legal costs I will not paper over. My cousin unfriended me. My mother's church friends stopped calling. I understood. People do not like conflict that shores up one person they love against another. 2 months after the case closed, I found myself crying in the pasta aisle because the jar shape my mother used to buy was discontinued. Grief chooses stupid proofs. I recorded a video about it and cut it from the channel's schedule. I kept private what needed to be private. The internet does not deserve every tear. On a Tuesday in August, I went back to the bank trust office for a different appointment. The junior attorney who had sat through our first meeting saw me in the lobby and said, "You handled yourself well." I said, "It only worked because of paper." He said, "Paper is how people like me hear." I walked out into heat that soaked your shirt in minutes and thought about how many people never record the TOD affidavit or never update the beneficiary form. I thought about how many aunts and uncles and step-whatevers survive by counting on no one to check the index. I thought about my channel's title, which was a joke at first and then a compass. After Her Lies is not about one person. It's about what happens when you answer grief with action. There is one last thing, and it is not a twist so much as a footnote with consequences. In September, my aunt's attorney emailed me with a proposal to settle a potential claim for defamation based on statements made in a video I had posted about locks and access. I had not named my aunt or the street or the bank. I had said a relative. He quoted comments that used my cousin's first name. I forwarded the email to the media lawyer I had spoken with once when my subscriber base crossed 50,000. She wrote back a 2-paragraph reply to him about the difference between opinion and false statements of fact, and about the lack of identification. He did not write again. The cost of that 2-paragraph reply was $300. And it was the best money I spent in 2024. If you are watching this for tactics, here they are in clear lines. First, record the transfer on death designation for real estate if your state allows it. It is not a concept. It is an instrument number on a public website with a stamp. Second, update beneficiary designations for accounts. Brokerages have forms. They date them. You get confirmations. Third, keep a folder and make copies while you still can. Your memory will not be as strong when the oxygen monitor beeps at 3 a.m. Fourth if a relative files ex parte to become special administrator without disclosing non-probate transfers. Bring that to the court's attention calmly with documents. Fifth, know that caregiver agreements are real and can be fair, but must be documented. Courts do not pay vibes. Sixth, prepare for the human part to be worse than the paperwork, and plan who you will call after the hearing when the adrenaline drains. I also want to be precise about what did not happen. There were no criminal charges. There was no handcuff moment. No police. The judge did not scold anyone on camera. The bank did not expose my aunt. It applied standards to facts and got to numbers. I did not win a moral trophy. I got what my mother arranged. That is the closest thing to justice I know in estates. As for my channel, the video you're hearing is the longest I've ever recorded. I kept ads light. I did not read sponsor copy in the middle of filings. Views spiked around the hearing dates and sagged in between. That's fine. Life is mostly between. I post on Tuesdays and Fridays now at 6 p.m. Eastern for consistency. When I walk into the Cape Cod kitchen, I can hear my mother hum while she folded towels even though she is not there. The backsplash is still the same. I may change it next year. Or not. The house is quiet in a way that is not empty. There are boxes I haven't opened and letters I won't. You will want to know if my aunt and I speak now. The answer is yes. A little. In October, when the leaves in West Park go orange and the sky pretends to be bigger than it is, she sent me a link to an estate planning clinic the church was doing. It suggested people bring beneficiary forms. I wrote back, good. She sent a thumbs up. That's how it is. Not neatly mended, not entirely broken. We exist on either side of a line our mother's hand drew when she signed on December 8th. I will end on the scene where the reversal became irreversibly public. At the clerk's counter in April, when the county auditor's system updated the owner name with the TOD reference, a printout slid across the marble with my name where my mother's had been. There was no applause. There was no music. The clerk said, "You're set," and moved to the next person. I walked outside and sat in my car and let the paper rest in my lap. I texted no one. I did not post a story. I drove to the house, parked in the driveway, and set the printout on the kitchen table. I made a cup of coffee, the cheap kind my mother preferred. I stood in the sunlight strip that finds its way onto the linoleum at about 2 in the afternoon. I breathed. And for once since January 2nd, the breath went all the way down without hitting something sharp. If this walked you through more than drama, if it showed you forms you need and the calm you can keep, then the goal of After Her Lies was met today. 96% of viewers aren't subscribed. Please subscribe, like, and comment.